Hi, my name is Giordano. I'm interviewing Robert Greene at his home about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, we know he was in Memphis, Tennessee on the night of his assassination. Why was he there?
Oh, that's a very good question, Chris. And I know that he was there because at that time, in 1968, there was a lot of discrimination in the city, but in particular involving the sanitation workers. So the workers, I believe that some workers were actually killed on the job, and it was due indirectly to this discrimination that they experienced. So Martin Luther King was down there at that time to help out with the protests, to try to get these sanitation workers, African American sanitation workers, better work conditions. Thus he was there that night.
Now, what was the impact on Baltimore as a result of his death?
Well, I remember that Baltimore City was essentially shut down. And the reason was because there was a lot of looting and vandalism as a result. There was a curfew that was in effect from 6 o'clock in the evening until 6 a.m. No one was to be on the street at that time. It was illegal. Now, of course, some people had to work in the evenings, so they were jeopardized, possibly their jobs were. Now, at the time, I was 11 years old, so my knowledge was that of the incident, of the events of that time, are that of an 11-year-old. So there may be a lot of things that I am not aware of, but I do remember that there was a lot of looting and vandalism. Some of it, and I would venture to say a large portion of it, was just criminal activity, breaking into business establishments, looting, stealing. In fact, we lived across the street from two black-owned bars, Little Willie's Tavern and Sugar Hill Tavern. And we had a big picture window at my address at 2405 Druid Hill Avenue, and we were able to see both bars from our house. We were three houses from Druid Hill and Whitelock. We were on Druid Hill, but 3 houses from Whitelock Street, where the bars are situated. And every evening we could see as people broke into those businesses, and they were stealing, and we could even see through the broken window of Little Willie's. At one time I remember seeing someone swinging actually on a chandelier. But in time the police would show up and people would scatter. One particular incident I remember, some black cars came up, and some men, well-dressed black men, came out of the cars, and I heard someone, I don't remember if it was my mother or a neighbor, who said, it's the black Muslims. And I never really knew who the black Muslims were at that point, but it was apparent that they were very formidable gentlemen, because the police were also on the scene, but there was just a cessation of action. It's like things got orderly, and there was no real interaction between the Muslims and the police. And after a time, everybody kind of just left, and it was quiet. But I say that a lot of it was criminal activity, but a lot of it was also viewed as political, because Martin Luther King was a civil rights leader and he was assassinated. We didn't know initially that it was James Earl Ray, but we knew it had to be a white fellow who assassinated him, at least one white fellow. And so because of that, a lot of the looting took place against white establishments. And one way that a lot of establishments were able to avoid being vandalized was if it was known to be a black establishment, it wasn't touched, or if the words soul brother or some similar term were written on the front of the establishment, or painted on the front of the establishment, then the business was left alone. But so that was the political end. But also, as I said, a lot of it was criminal, and that was evidenced by the fact that Little Willie's Bar and Sugar Hill Tavern, both known black establishments, were also vandalized and looted. The National Guard was parked, they were camped out at Giordano Park, and I remember a couple of mornings, once the curfew lifted, on weekends, one of my brothers, my older brother Jimmy, took me and my younger brother out to Druid Hill Park, and we could see the National Guardsmen with the trucks and the jeeps and the tents, and it was like looking at a war scene. Being a young fellow, I was really fascinated by that, and also by the fact my brother Jimmy was also a student at Drexel University at the time, and he was taking ROTC. So he would give us the benefit of a lot of his military training, and we just thought it was really good. He talked about taking PT. We'd go to the park and do exercise, and then we went to see the troops. So it was a very at the same time, it was a sad experience, being that Martin Luther King was assassinated, but also it was exciting as well as frightening.
Now, earlier you mentioned James Earl Ray as being a suspect of the assassination. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that he was the one who assassinated Martin Luther King?
Well, I believe that James Earl Ray was the man who pulled the trigger. I don't have any reason to believe that he wasn't the one who did it. Because of accounts that were given by law enforcement, it appears that he didn't act alone. One thing that just seems to be a common sense question to me is, how did he know to be perched where he was at the very time that Martin Luther King and his companions were leaving to go to dinner? How did he know that he would be on the balcony of the, I believe it was the Lorraine Hotel, at that time? That seems to be a mystery. But also, we do remember more recently, toward the end of James Earl Ray's life, he did want the case reopened, and he claimed that there were others involved in this, and some even felt, and I believe the King family itself felt, that James Earl Ray wasn't even involved in the assassination. Now, I don't know. I have no way of knowing, and of course nobody has any way of knowing now, because the U.S. government refused to reopen the case, which I think is a loss, because now we're left with this mystery. Whatever secret or whatever information that James Earl Ray had, it went to the grave with him. So we'll never know the full story as to the how of Martin Luther King's assassination.
Martin Luther King and Malcolm X had some similar goals during the Civil War era. How were some of their goals similar and different?
Well, when we talk about the similarities and differences between Malcolm X, as far as the similarity, they both were interested in freedom and equality for African Americans and minorities in the United States. In fact, not just limited to the United States, but to the world. But this was the starting ground, because they were citizens here in the United States, and they had to begin where they were. So they both had a single purpose, and that was the liberation of African Americans, the gaining of civil rights and equality for us here. But where the difference lies was in the how to achieve that goal. Martin Luther King was recognized as, if not the leader, one of the most important leaders of the civil rights movement at that time, and the voice of the movement. His focus was civil rights, that is, equal rights for African Americans in the United States. The recognition of our citizenship here. The difference with Malcolm X was that he took it beyond the level of civil rights. He was looking to take it to the level of human rights, because if we're here in the United States, our civil rights are being violated, and that violation is being sanctioned by the U.S. government, then the U.S. government is a part of the problem. In other words, the U.S. government is the criminal who's perpetrating the crime of discrimination against, at that time, 22 million African Americans. Now, if you want to have the problem resolved, as Malcolm said, you don't take the case to the criminal, which meant going to the Supreme Court, the U.S. government trying to get the remedy for your problem. You don't take the case to the criminal. He said you take the criminal to court. In other words, you take the whole U.S. government to the World Court, the United Nations. And I believe that once he took the struggle beyond the shores of the United States of America and had his sights on the UN, taking the case before the world, I believe at that point that it was determined that Malcolm X had to be assassinated. So those, as I see it, were the similarities and the differences between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Do you think, as a nation today, we are closer to realizing his dream?
I would say that we are closer, in the sense that among many Americans, we're able to live together and get along regardless of skin color or ethnicity. I mean, I know this personally just from my interactions. I went to a school, high school, that was 85% white. I was part of a 15% minority there from 1971 through 1974.
Do you believe that the fact that we have an African American president in the year 2010, that's something that many have tried to run for but always failed, but the fact that he was able to progress to the President of the United States shows that there is progress within the African American community and fighting the social barriers that they faced before?
I believe really that in spite of the problems that have arisen as a result, I believe that it is a sign of progress. And one of the things too, another dynamic of the 60s and even further back than the 60s was that black people were not only discriminated against by white people, but black people were discriminated against by other black people. In other words, there was an expression that I used to hear when I was a little boy, the white man's ice is always colder. In other words, believing that blacks were inferior and that Caucasians were superior, even black people believed that, well, if I'm in trouble, if I need a doctor, I'd rather go to a white doctor than a black doctor. The white man's ice always being colder, the white man's merchandise would always be better quality than the black man's merchandise. That was something that was prevalent, an attitude that was prevalent in that day. Also, I mean, as recently as 1990, I ran into a 25-year-old fellow in a restaurant who said, without embarrassment, without equivocation, that he believed that white people were better than black people. So it shows that the discrimination existed not just among white people toward blacks, but also among black people toward black. So the very fact that Barack Obama was able to win the presidency, and even the fact that he had a majority of the African American community voting for him, shows that not only have white people on a large scale gotten beyond racist attitudes, but even we as black people have gotten beyond our inferiority complex. We're able to trust a black man to rule our nation. So has progress been made? I believe it has.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Chris.